former Fulton County District Attorney and Sheriff.
Formerly a judge, and he knows a little bit about how these things go.
Mohawk Valley, legal eagle, lawman.
He is the Sheriff of Fulton County, New York. Just such an amazing guy.
This is the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet.
Hey, welcome. I'm Rich Giardino. Thanks for tuning in to the Constitution, Crime, and Politics. Today, I have a unique guest. He's here for a young perspective on politics, getting involved as a college student, and actually managing campaigns at a young age. And then we're going to discuss a little bit about some articles he's written that have been published. And more importantly, we're going to talk about how do we get young people engaged in politics and we stop the bitterness that's going on. So my guest will be Everett Noakes, Jr., and we'll have Everett when we come back. Hey, Everett, thank you for being on today. I really appreciate it. How you doing this morning?
Great, Sheriff. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Good. Tell us a little bit about your background with where you're going to college, where's your hometown, and what you're doing now political wise.
Yeah, so I'm from Clifton Park in Saratoga County. I started my higher education at SUNY Adirondack in Queensbury. I graduated there with an associate's and then moved on to the university at Albany, where I graduated in just a few weeks here. And then I'm have applied to Albany Law School as well. So throughout those 4 years, I've been pretty involved in some of the local and the state campaigns here in Saratoga County, and then also statewide. So this year, I've taken on a few assembly roles, campaigns rather, and some town races as well. So we're really excited for this season. It's picking up here now as we're approaching May.
Now, one of the things that's interesting is you did some help with Elise Stefanik. Was it an internship or was it a campaign? Kind of like really seeing federal politics at its roots.
Yeah, sure. So, to start, when I was 18, I was the lodge chief in Twin Rivers Council for the Boy Scouts of America. So I represented for the scouting community much of what is now Congresswoman Stefanik's district. For myself, I had the addition of Albany, Rensselaer, and Schenectady counties. But through that, I was able to sit on their executive board. And I met some of the state senators and assemblymen who introduced me to the Congresswoman then, which was back in, I want to say around 2019. So thereafter, I took a role on her campaign. I interned for her in the Washington, D.C. office. And then I came back and I did a good amount of campaign work for a few years thereafter that as well.
So it's like you catch the bug when you go to Washington or when you work on a campaign of that nature, and somebody as powerful as Congresswoman Stefanik at the time with so much going on. So you kind of catch a little bit of the bug. So now you wrote a few articles in college that have been published in major newspapers around the country. Can you tell us like how you picked your topics and what they were?
Yeah, certainly. So I have three major ones. One was pertaining to the New York State governor's race when Congresswoman Stefanik was, our pick for governor. And another was on physician-assisted suicide, which has become, an increasingly controversial topic across Europe and North America. So my first one was on the economy and hypothetical of selling the U.S. Postal Service to UPS, as they've operated in $1 billion deficit for decades. So that was my first hit, and that got across to over 25 major newspapers from across the country. And all three are published in the DC Journal by inside sources that have added me as a contributing writer.
That's great. Tell us a little bit about where you end up on the assisted suicide, or don't you reach a conclusion? I personally have evolved. I've known people who were very sick. And one of my podcasts is about Live Like You Were Dying, because I was misdiagnosed with end-stage liver disease and told I had less than 2 years to live. And then after a biopsy, I was told, oh, it's a mistake. You can live, you'll have at least 10 years unless you get hit by a Mack truck. Not a really warming, positive statement. But tell me where you fall and why you ended up there on assisted suicide.
Sure. So it's definitely a pretty diverse subject. I have mixed feelings on this. I think that there's a lot of different cases where it should be allowed, and I think that there's a plethora of cases where it's just not the right avenue. So my article was more of a research fact paper that was then shifted into a political opinion piece. But so it focuses on starting in the UK and some other countries within Europe. There's an advertisement program for physician-assisted suicide, and there's a lot of moral objections I have to the advertisement of that. And so when we look at it as a subject, I think that there are plenty of cases where it is the right choice for terminally ill folks. But there are some minority groups and some certain demographics where I feel, if targeted, this could become a normalized action, and I think that that's where I have a pretty firm stance against it. I think that when you look at on the topic of suicide in a major realm, you look at certain demographics are at a much higher risk. Native Americans being a front group of that. So when you look at cases in North America, this has been more so popular in Canada in recent years. You have 11% of cases where people fall through with physician-assisted suicide. 11% of those cases are people under 45 years old who are not terminally ill. So, again, that's a small segment of the greater good, but 11 still accounted for tens of thousands of people in the past 8-9 years, and that's the problem I have with it. So I think in some cases it should be allowed, but and the paper doesn't necessarily reach a precise conclusion. It offers just different paths for people to formulate their own opinion. But there are just certain cases where it's right, certain cases where it's wrong, and I think the paper allows people to form their own opinion on it.
Mm-hmm. And your paper on and your assistance with Elise Stefanik, I think she would have been a strong candidate for governor. Met Bruce Blakeman. As you know, I was tapped for 12 hours to be a possible lieutenant governor running mate. It's interesting because my demographics were close to Elise's, Adirondacks, veterans. I support a lot of veterans events and I'm actively involved in supporting that. And also the Second Amendment. Plus, I spent almost 2 years on Fox News combating Andrew Cuomo when he put a limit on how many people could be at your Thanksgiving dinner and ordered police to get involved. So that propelled me to Fox News. I've been on Fox regularly, and I was a guest host on a local radio station, WGY, for about a year when the announcer would take the day off. So that was pretty interesting, and that's what got me into the podcast. Are you an employee of the Assembly or Senate, or are you a freelancer who is managing these campaigns as a business?
So last year, when after Congresswoman Stefanik had announced her governor run, I sort of took on some more local races. So I've just been doing it. What was a hobby turned into somewhat of a business, but more so just a passion. It's not work to me. It's getting the right people elected, and that is anybody who I've morally aligned with. And I think that you know, on a statewide level, there's a lot of assembly and senate races that we're able to flip, and I think that we have quite the governor's race ahead of us. And I think that, as you said, you were tapped for a short span there for as a possible lieutenant governor candidate. I think it's necessary to have somebody from upstate in that role, even preferably the governor role. But we know a significant percent of our population is downstate, but people upstate want to come out for another upstater, and they care about backing law enforcement. They care about reducing energy costs and taxes, and I think they would really appreciate someone upstate in that statewide office, because they're able to relate to them. And we are often underrepresented, in the North Country, in the Mohawk Valley. But I think the Congresswoman has done a tremendous job at that, and we have a really good, Republican delegation from upstate. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I think most people don't realize that if the election were held upstate, with the exception of Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse, upstate and Albany, upstate generally, the county-wise and vote tallies go Republican in gubernatorial races. But when you take the city, we lose a lot. And I think that, it's extreme, but New York City values, to say the least, especially with Mandami, may be a little bit different than values in Fulton County and in the Adirondacks and in upstate. The cultures are different when it comes to needs. Public transportation is not a thing in the upstate area. We have hardships. We spend a lot of time in our cars driving to work, driving back and forth. It's a lot more expensive in that regard than hopping on a train or a bus. There's a lot of issues that separate us. I mean, we're all people, and we all care about better schools for our kids, safer environments. We want a nursing home that's going to provide safety for our parents and grandparents. We want crime down across the board. It's how we get there that separates, I think, New York City from upstate. Their views on coddling criminals, their views on getting even with past viewed injustices are at odds. So can you tell us some of the campaigns you're working on, or would you prefer not and just talk in general terms?
Yeah, definitely. So we have a pretty heated race in New York's Assembly District here in the 113th, which includes a good amount of Saratoga County, parts of Warren County, and parts of Washington County. So we have a great candidate. Alan Crusoe is a small business owner out of Saratoga Springs, running in this race, which has now been in the past few days. I guess it's now been a three-way race. So we're challenging the incumbent Democrat Assemblywoman Carrie Warner, who's been there. She's in my backyard in the village around Lake. So she's been in the role for many years, and we're looking for change. And with that, we're also doing some town races in the district and in Moreau and Wilton and Malta, and we're trying to take back some of these towns that are pretty down the middle when it comes to politics, but on campaigning on the right issues, folks will come out, and I think they will vote across party lines, as it's the local races are much different from national headlines and national races. Far too often, I think people like to equate any candidate on one side of the aisle to the top person on the ticket, whether that's the governor candidate or the president, the presidential ticket. So I think people in these small towns will come across the political aisle and feel invigorated and ready to vote. So we have some challenging races, but I do think we have a very solid chance at taking some of these seats back.
And you mentioned Round Lake. One of my favorite restaurants is the Lake Ridge. So shout out to the Lake Ridge, which if you haven't been there, you should go there. It's excellent. It's in an old house, and the food is excellent. It's they got a great chef, and they're not a sponsor of this program yet, but maybe after that plug they will be. But anyways, you're listening to the Constitution, Crime, and Politics, the Rich Giardino Show. You can hear us on X, YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, and Apple, and all other premium podcast shows. I ask you to please like and subscribe and share with your friends. We're with Everett Noakes. Everett is a young man who's going to graduate in less than 2 weeks from SUNY Albany and hopefully be attending law school, the same school I attended, Albany Law School. He's gotten involved in politics, and we talked a little bit about where he stands and some articles he's written, but now we want to shift a little bit to the acrimony and the nastiness of these races this time. As a political observer, I've been up front and close to a lot of things I've seen that are nasty, trying to politicize the law enforcement and prosecutors to get involved in races that should be decided by the voters or election boards. A lot of canceling politics where they try to go after people for perceived statements. I don't know why our candidates can't disagree agreeably and get rid of, some of the nastiness. And so we're going to turn our conversation to that. And how do you get young people involved? How do you keep it positive? I always cite Antonin Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg as examples of people totally different aisles and on extreme sides of the issues legally, but as Supreme Court justices, they and their families would vacation together and they'd have family dinners together, showing that you can get along and still disagree on policy issues. And I also look back at Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. They were the perfect example. Tip O'Neill fought all day for the Democratic viewpoints and issues, and Ronald Reagan was a conservative Republican. And yet at night they'd have a cigar and a drink and have dinner together and got along well. And we seem to have lost that camaraderie. And at the same time, a lot of young people are not involved. There's no good news source. Everything is questioned, whether it's national news or cable networks, or anything on the computer. People are just, I think that the divisiveness drives us farther away, and 20% of the Republicans who are extreme and 20% of the Democrats who are extreme control the media because the media plays to them, and most people are in the center. Again, I said it before and I'll say it again. We share the same common goals. We want safer schools. Teachers shouldn't have to be bodyguards or security officers. We want nursing homes and senior housing that's clean and healthy, and they take care of our parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles. We want crime we want to reduce crime, and some of the stats they play with show crime is down. But if you're the person who got pushed into the subway, or if you had acid thrown in your face, or you were raped, you know what? It doesn't matter that the crime is lower. You're a victim, and there's a lot of victims in this state, and a lot of it can be blamed on bail. And they say, well, bail, that's a false argument, but it's not a false argument. There's people who keep getting out in the revolving door of justice. They're out before we finish with the victim, taking a statement from the victim, and defendants get an appearance ticket and walk. There's a lot of things that we could do to put the focus on victims. And I believe before any legislation on crime and criminal justice is passed, the last question is, does this make it safer for law-abiding citizens, period? Not better for those who commit crimes or easier on those who've got felonies, but does it make it better for the law-abiding citizens? So, Everett, turning on that, how do we get people together? I mean, you've seen it in some of your races that things have just gotten so bitter, and people don't even enter the same. Some candidates are refusing to debate because they don't want to be in the same room as their opponent, which is ridiculous. I mean, people need a free exchange of ideas without fear of being called stupid, without the fear of being attacked. Just listen, if you don't agree with my idea, attack my idea. Don't attack me. So what do you sense among your friends? And, an Eagle Scout's different because 5% of Eagle Scouts are the top of the scouting, and they end up going on to government and business, and they're very successful. But what do you sense from your friends, and how do we get young people your age to be back engaged in a positive way?
Well, first of all, I think it's great that you touched on bail. I think that's, it's a major problem that we have in New York. I think it's an issue perhaps unique to, New York. And we see it right here, 10 minutes across the Mohawk from me in Albany County, where it's a major issue. Um, I think something that 95% of Americans can agree on is backing law enforcement. And, and that reaches across the political aisle. And I think that those same 95% can agree that if you commit a crime, you need to be locked up regardless of the crime. And you can't be back on the streets 5 hours after committing the crime. So that's a leading issue that we need to take care of. And I think, our governor candidate will work on that as well if elected. So, but moving forward to just what we've seen in recent years, political violence. I was grateful enough to meet Charlie Kirk last July, I believe it was, in Tampa, and at one of the Turning Point conferences. So, it's such a shame what happened to him, and I think that we're seeing this increase in political violence and you know a no more open dialogue even with candidates on the same side of the political aisle. And this is not just an issue on the left, this is an issue on the right. But we've seen in recent years just this uptick in hatred and violence on the left, spewing out. And I think that people are over it and people want to come back to civil dialogue. um, in order to do that, I think to your point, we need to attack ideas and not each other. And far too often, we're seeing people, even in local races, we're seeing people on the same side of the political aisle just attack each other, and the name calling and whatnot doesn't accomplish anything. The infighting doesn't accomplish anything, and what people have to do is come back to the table, reach across the aisle, and know that you're not going to win on every single issue, but open dialogue is what's going to allow you to bring some of your viewpoints to elected office. And unfortunately, if it's not stopped, and the partisanship continues, then who knows, to what end this will get. But political violence has no place in this country. And I think with people being able to come back to the middle, reach across the table, that you know open dialogue is what will save this country and bring it back to a time where everybody's patriotic, regardless of who's in the Oval Office and who's the governor. And that's what Americans need to be doing right now, both elected and unelected. You can't be your neighbor, your family, your friends. We see this at the Thanksgiving dinner table. People can't even, touch on politics, religion, whatever, without there being a complete, you know, argument. And we can't have that anymore. We have to, come back across the aisle and be able to be civil with each other and have just open dialogue. And I think that's what people on both sides have tried to achieve. There are people, but I think some of those more partisan voices, particularly from the left, need to come back to the middle. And listen, partisanship, it makes money. The news keeping people divided, it makes money. It's one of the biggest industries in the country, and people don't want to acknowledge that. But people coming back and having open dialogue, regardless of who's in office, is going to what's make this country great again. So I think that's what we need to try to accomplish moving forward.
Well, you just made a mistake and said make this country great again. I mean, there's some people that Donald Trump, really, they have Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, I had friends stop talking to me over the election. Well, you're a Republican, you must be voting for Trump. And I said, I'm voting for his policies. I can't justify or defend some of the things he says, but his policies, I think, are good for the country if we adopt them. And one thing that you said that's correct is the statements, I mean, foaming at the mouth, despite despising your opponent, your political opponent, is the words used do make a difference. And when these people say they've got to be stopped, we've got to stop this politician, he's got to be stopped, look at the hate that this politician's spewing, and then somebody gets shot. And a lot of it is driven because people who are mentally unstable hear these words and they follow them through. And one thing that seems very, even under Trump, there's still some questions about the shooting in Pennsylvania. There's questions about Charlie Kirk. There's questions about the guy who attempted assassinate or had the rifle at Mar-a-Lago. Like a lot of these people are traveling all over. They have several phones. They've got all this, and they're not working. So who's funding them? You know. And I thought we were going to have more open government with the promises that you'll know more, but a lot of times they don't disclose stuff. Maybe they haven't found them out, or maybe there's a wider conspiracy they're looking at. But, you know, the fellow who had the rifle down in Mar-a-Lago, interesting about him was he was supposedly a part-time contractor, but he had been visited several countries and had several cars and all these things. And you're like, where's he getting the money? You know, follow the money, you know? So it feeds the conspiracies. And I'm not trying to feed conspiracies. I'm trying to say it raises legitimate questions. Where does this money come from? You know, the one was and it's not political, but the Las Vegas shooting at the country music festival. You know, this guy, they search everything. They don't have a motive. They can't find any footprint, you know, in this day and age. And in order to be radicalized, there's got to be a footprint because you learn it or you follow it somewhere, you know?
Sure.
So as a law enforcement person, as a former DA and as a former judge and now as a sheriff, I question, like, there's got to be a footprint somewhere. There's got to be something, you know? And again, and I believe in telling people, you know, look, crazy people, and I use the term crazy, illogical, mentally ill people, their logic isn't your logic. So you can't always figure out what drives them, but there are telltale signs that something's going on, you know, and they got it somewhere, which whether it triggered their hatred or triggered them, we have to look at what that is. And you know, it's like school shootings, you know, anytime anyone's life is taken unnecessarily, is an awful thing. But look, every weekend, if you go to Detroit or you go to Washington, I can give you Detroit, Chicago, Baltimore. I can name you little kids. I had a list. I used to keep a list of names in my phone. And I could say, do you know Jay Walker? So-and-so. Jay Walker was 7 years old and he was in Chicago playing ball in his yard and he got shot by drive-by druggies. You know, so there's no way to say that one is worse than the other. If you kill a kid in a drive-by, it's as bad as shooting kids in a school. You know, we never, you know, we try to make differences and there's not. It's a child's life taken unnecessarily. And to say, you know, a school shooter or an active shooter is worse than a gangbanger. No, gangbangers are killing people. And if you go to these big cities, in a month, more young people will die than a school shooting. And that's not right. And we don't do enough. You know, every time there's a shooting, we clamp down on legitimate gun owners who've taken tests and have gotten, you know, background investigations. So we've got to do more to protect our kids. And it doesn't mean taking guns away from law-abiding citizens. It means punishing those who illegally possess them, you know? So yeah, I'm conservative, moderate I'm conservative on that, but I do believe in background checks. But I think that we never address anything in a holistic manner. We pick and choose little pieces, you know? I do think that President Trump, I think a lot of his stuff is they're gonna attack me anyways. I might as well, you know. So let's take over Greenland, you know, and everyone goes nuts, you know. Let's take over Canada, and everyone goes nuts. And it's like, you know, is he just being Trump, and there's nothing to it, you know, or does he have some motive? And as somebody said the other day, you know, buy his book, not to make money for him, but you know, The Art of the Deal, because that's how he's taken a business model and put it in government. You know, I want to thank you for coming on. And is there anything else we need to know? How do you engage like kids your age? I mean, how do you get the other side to meet with you and to talk without, you know, making it a hostile thing? you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first, to your point, I think that President Trump has brought, for 75 years, people said they wanted businessmen in the Oval Office, and now you have that. And I think, you know, part of the reason why he has been incredibly successful in business is that he's been able to say whatever he wants, and sometimes that is, I believe, just to get a reaction out of people. But there are people who say we need to get him gone, and he needs to be stopped, as you said. And I think that's with many politicians. You have people on the right say that about former President Biden and Vice President Harris, and so I think that just the rhetoric has to calm down. We obviously have a mental health issue, crisis in the country, and I think that we need to address that, and tone down the rhetoric and have people work on both sides of the aisle together. But in terms of how we could effectively do this moving forward, I think that the younger generation is more in tune politically than folks imagine. I think that there's a misconception that the entire generation is this left wing brainwashed group of people. I think that the ability to bridge that gap is we're closer to that than I think that society believes. And people just have to have civil discussion without getting all worked up. If I say I disagree with this senator or this congressman, and you're a big supporter of that, you don't have to take that personally as if I'm saying your entire legacy means nothing. It is, at the end of the day, you're either disagreeing with the rhetoric or the policy of most people. I think nowadays it's people are more so disagreeing rhetoric, at least on the national stage. But I think people just have to sit down and realize that political discussion does not have to be an attack on one's legacy or individual, but rather we have to focus more so on the policy and what said person is getting done or said party, and how we could come to the middle on certain subjects that we know Americans might more so disagree on. And just be able to we have to tone back the rhetoric first before we could come to the table, and I think that's something that both sides have to work on.
Excellent point. One of the things, and it hits young people hard also, is I've always wanted to focus more, and I've tried to raise issues on our public Facebook and my private Facebook, is suicides, drug overdoses, mental health are big issues affecting the criminal justice system. And what we've done with the schools, the teachers, what we've done with police, what we've done with medical, we've taken these systems and we've said, you're going to be the caretaker for everybody. So, police, you need more mental health treatment hours so that you can treat those mentally ill. You need more suicide prevention. Yeah, we do need more training in those things, but we're not the end all be all. I often said the one thing I've learned in 50 years of being involved in the criminal justice system, I hate to say that, 50 years, Jesus, but in being involved in the criminal justice system, say 48 years I can get away with, is that every failure of every other system ends up in the criminal justice system. So if the individual has failings, sooner or later, they're going to bleed over into the criminal justice system. The family's failures of the raising kids becomes our problem eventually. The schools failures become law enforcement problem. DSS's, Department of Social Services failures become our problem. We have to take all these problems that are the failures of other systems, from the individual, the family, other agencies, mental health and everything, and we're supposed to take care of them and treat them. And then when we do get involved, we're so heavy-handed, quote unquote, and we're, hate the police, defund the police. But I often say, Everett, the one thing is this: we're the only profession that you can, shoot bottle rockets at us. You can say, fry them up like bacon. You can ambush us and kill us. You can attack us. You can go after us verbally as community organizers, as politicians. It's our fault. You can indict us. But at the end of the day, you call 911 and our dispatchers don't ask you what political party you are, how you identify today, what's your race. They say, what's your emergency and where are you? And they send police, fire, EMS. So we have my shout out to law enforcement and our partners, because we have an increasingly more difficult job in today's society. We went from 950,000 law enforcement officers across the country before George Floyd to somewhere around 650,000, because nobody wants to be a police officer, not when you're under constant attack, and not when you do something, you're presumed guilty, not presumed innocent, like the people you arrest. So with us has been Everett Noakes. I appreciate it. A young mind, he's going to go places. I think you have a bright future, and I appreciate it. I wish you well with your campaigns, and I wish you well with getting into law school. Look, they let me into Albany Law School, so that should be a sign of hope for anyone to get into Albany Law School. Everett, thanks for being with me.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
It's been the Rich Giardino Show. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, Apple, and X, and all premium podcaster shows. Thanks to our guest, Everett Noakes. Have a good week.
Like and subscribe to The Rich Giardino Show, part of the Elite Influencer Network, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll see you next time on The Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet.